Hello, folks, and welcome back to the DeFi Collective with myself, Robert Vaughn, and our host, Alex Jewell.
Hello, folks.
Today, we have some very,
a
very interesting subject that most people are unaware of. And we, thought we would attack this subject because of the fact that most people aren't aware of it. And you're affected by it every day. We here at the DeFi Collective respond to requests that we get, at our email, the DeFiCollective@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook. We go live on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube. And on YouTube, you can find us at the DeFi Collective or Let's Talk Radio. But the subject we're going to attack today is algorithmic equality, algorithmic equity, algorithmic oppression, and also machine learning bias. And I mean, we're not saying that the robots are biased, but we'll present some evidence and let you make the call. One of the things that I just did a little experiment today, and I said, I don't know if this is true. I said, let me just check it out and just make sure before we get started. So I saw a show and it said, if you Google different girls, different things come up, So I Googled different groups of girls. I Googled Latina girls. And the first thing that came up was want to date Latin women, single and pretty Colombians, young Latina girls, the Latin dating site. I Googled Asian girls, and it says young and hot Asian women, meet sexy women, 100,000 Asian girls online, meet Asian beauties, et cetera, et cetera. I Googled black girls, and the first thing that came up was a song called Black Girls, and then Black Girls Rock, and then Black Girls on Pinterest, Therapy for Black Girls, and 500 Black Girl Pictures. Then African American ladies, stunning African singles, fine Black girls dating. I Googled white girls, and what came up was one of my favorite movies, White Chicks. That was the first thing that came up, White Girls paperback. And then it was some books entitled White Girls and White Chicks and White Girls versus Brown Girls, White Girls and White Chicks. So you can see there's a difference in the algorithm. And I think when you Google something, the algorithm pulls up what they think you were looking for. Is that correct, Alex?
Yeah. So the way the algorithms work is the problem is that there isn't a lot of direct human influence over preserving the reliability of those results. In fact, they're results driven by human behavior using it. So over time, the more people search for certain terms or phrases, in this case, some group, some race with girls, that search term, unfortunately, over time, becomes reflective of perhaps some cultural inequalities that exist around how people think culturally about groups of girls. So they might be, especially when they're searching online at Google, when somebody searches Asian girls, it's not like they're looking for the most successful 10, the 10 most successful Asian women in the world, right? The problem is that our data and our algorithms starkly reflect the inequalities and the human nature of the problems that we still encounter, right, as human beings in society. And so ultimately what you're being delivered is that imperfect cocktail of things that just reflect our own imperfections as a society. And so one of the things we're going to talk about is how the algorithms and AI are often touted as being fully objective, right? Oh, it's a computer, so it's just going to think like a computer and not like a person. That's not true, because they're often Frankensteins designed in our own image, and who learn from us, right? If they're learning from us to do their job, well, that doesn't always go super well. So, that might make things worse. It might exacerbate inequalities in society.
Right. And algorithms sort of magnify mistakes or inequalities that might not otherwise get magnified, because they're they just for instance, like the self-driving cars, they're trying to, one of the algorithms they can't figure out is how you make a value judgment. If I'm riding down the street and a 3-year-old girl runs in front of the car, do I go left and crash head on into a bus, or do I kill the girl? Who do I kill?
Trolley problem, right?
Yeah, so that's a case where an algorithm wouldn't do much good. And I guess the algorithm so far in self-driving cars would say protect the occupant of the car and go straight ahead and run the girl over. But that's not what most people would do. Most people would probably crash into a car or run up on a sidewalk or something, if they could. So algorithms are not flawless. And I think we can see that because machine learning, for instance, with, I hate to pick on Facebook, but, with Facebook, it's sort of the poster child for algorithmic inequity. For instance, Facebook, if you react, people react more to a negative post than they do a positive post. If they post, Alex built 100 houses for the homeless, they say, oh, that's nice. But they say, well, Alex, shot 27 people trying to get this one guy, then 10 times as many people would click on that because it's so negative.
Right.
And once you click on something like that, then they'll send you more negative things that they think you might be interested in, because Facebook is an advertising company. Google is basically an advertising company, and they use algorithms to increase viewership and to increase engagement. And that's what they get paid on, engagement.
Right.
They said
it's a heat map, right? Algorithms look at things almost like a heat map.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the hottest drama? Where are the hottest words being used? The most, the most antagonistic words, or the most back and forth that's occurring, or what's making people stay the longest on a post and engage with that post the most, and even click on it, right? What's making somebody click on a post? Well, ultimately, it's triggering of emotions, right? It's making somebody respond and react. And usually, as we know within psychology, negative emotional reactions on a heat map tend to be stronger than positive emotional reactions. And that's ultimately another component of human nature that gets exaggerated to the point of making things worse in algorithmic, in the algorithm state.
Yeah, negative experiences are much stronger. I previous life, I worked for a manufacturing company, and we did a study that found that people who were satisfied with our product would tell on average 3 other people. So we said, oh, that's great, man. So we just need to keep satisfied. But somebody that was dissatisfied would tell 18 different people within a 2-year period. I got screwed. This product is awful. Don't buy it. So you'd have to, the negative experience is the one that people are drawn to and that they spend time on,
No.
So that's what makes, the Facebook algorithm so dangerous, because a lot of times, that's why some companies don't really like Facebook, in there. Like, some countries, excuse me. I think China and India, for example. Is that correct, Alex? They're not too crazy about Facebook.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And ironically, India's made TikTok illegal, but China's made, China and India have both made Facebook, or I don't know if Facebook's illegal in India, but TikTok is.
It was a couple months ago, but they tend to flip flop. So maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's legal again. Yeah. But, Facebook, for instance, and we talked about this before, how algorithms and artificial intelligence and machine learning, how they tend to magnify things that happen. For instance, I did another experiment, and I just, like on Facebook, I was like, oh God, I hate meat. I was just saying, I hate meat. And all of a sudden I got all this vegan stuff for about 2 weeks. Meat, what meat does bad for you, meat. And then I said, okay, I like fish. I think maybe I got 1 or 2 ads for fish dinner or something. So the word that I use, hate, which is a very strong word, and emotionally, it's an emotional word. When you say I hate something, that's a pretty strong
Oh,
emotion.
yeah, if he hates it, he's definitely going to spend $15 on a fake one.
Yeah. But I said I hate meat. I hate hot
Yeah.
dogs and steak. And I started getting all kind of vegan stuff when I just said I like fish. Then I got a little fish. So that tells me that the algorithm responds to the intensity
Right.
of the emotions or the words that you use, you know.
Exactly.
And I think, you know, we talked about this before, and that's why, you know, when George Floyd was killed, you had Black Lives Matter protests around the world. You know, I knew an artist in New Zealand. She said, "Oh, I can't talk. I got to go to a Black Lives Matter protest." I said, "There's no black people there." So there any black people there? She said, "There may be one there. I don't know, one or two." But you
Yeah.
know, you had that algorithm for in social media, Facebook and Google was kind of driving people to one corner or the other.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you know, the January 6th insurrection last year, you know, you had a lot of people who were driven to the opposite corner, you know, and people say, well, I wonder why, how could someone who is very successful and, you know, has been in the armed forces and is an elected official could buy into this stuff and show up at the White House and try to overturn the government? It's because the algorithms sends them things to their Facebook and their Telegram or wherever, Telegraph or Telegram, whatever they look at, you know, that drives them to a certain point. And if you're inundated with certain things, you know, all day long, you tend to like, that has an effect on you. You know,
Right.
that has an effect on how you think, how you feel. And I think that's why you get things like that, you know, because people say, well, you know, the election was a fraud, you know, and now even Mitch McConnell saying the election was no fraud, you know, was saying it was legit, which is, you know, you got
Now it's too late, right? That's the other weird thing. You know, if you convince enough people with the powerful tools, the technological tools that know them better than they know themselves, convince them of things over time, even when other people then that they formally agreed with or look up to, when they come out and disagree with it, well, now they're just wrong, right? Now they've sold out, they've been compromised by the propaganda machine.
And they can even do things like get thousands of people to show up in Texas waiting for JFK Jr. to come back. And was he going to be on the ticket with Trump? Is that what they said? He was going to be on the ticket with Trump?
Yeah. They believe that Trump, I mean, QAnon has a lot of factions at this point, a lot of moving conspiracy theories, but they believe that JFK is coming back and that Trump's currently in the White House and like ready to like, you know, he's going to like unveil his real presidency. I mean, it's staggering, right? I mean, it's hard to imagine from my perspective, but understanding the power of that tech, right? I mean, reiterating the fact that these algorithms do know you better than you know you. They know what drives your behavior. And it's not like a person knowing it, because a person knowing it maybe has some sort of more humane understanding of how it impacts your life or how it impacts greater society. The algorithms aren't that's not one of their goals, right? It's not one of their jobs. Their job is to dictate your behavior for the sake of exposure to advertising, right? And this is where, you know, surveillance capitalism always comes back, because at the end of the day, you know, a lot of people will complain or attack the obvious state surveillance, the surveillance state of China. That's very obvious. They don't hide it by any means with the social scoring system and things like that. But in America, we have something perhaps even more insidious, right? We have a corporate scoring system. We have a capitalistic system that drives human behavior instead. And it's a surveillance system that not just, you know, doesn't just keep track of us, that it actually moves us, right? It moves 300,000 extra people to the polls because of where a Facebook button was in an election where it was only won by 100,000, right? I mean, that's pretty staggering when you think about the influence of just where the button was for those 300,000 people.
Power. That's a lot of power for one person to have.
Right.
You know, and I remember back in the days before 1984, when the George Orwell book 1984 came out, they talked about a lot of these things. People always thought it was the government that was going to come after you.
Yeah.
You know, it was going to take your data and manipulate you. nobody up until now really thought that it would be private corporations. But because of the nature of capitalism, private corporations are pretty much the government.
Right. That's sort of
You know what I'm saying? And that's something we didn't
bigger
foresee.
picture.
Yeah, that's something we didn't foresee. You know, so a little bit more about algorithmic inequity or machine learning bias. You know, they even have some courts in the country now that use algorithms to decide if someone will be a repeat offender.
Yep.
And race is something that figures prominently into this algorithm. And I saw, I think it was on that coded bias, maybe it was on coded bias or another program, where they had two guys with the same record, one black and one white. And because of the weight that race played, they recommended that the black guy not be given parole because there was a 86% chance that he would reoffend, and the white guy, they recommended him for parole. And this was based on the algorithm, not based on anything other than an algorithm. So that's, you know, that's one way that algorithmic bias works, you know. And another article I read was that in interviewing people for jobs in corporate America, you know, if you're white and have tattoos, you score lower than somebody who's white that doesn't have tattoos. So if you're white and you have tattoos and certain type of haircut, then you get a lower score than somebody else.
Unless you're interviewing for a bartender position.
Yeah. Even though, you know, in corporate America, even though you might be 10 times as qualified, you know, and you have tattoos and an earring, and then that doesn't, you know, it doesn't place you very high on the scoring system, you know. So I think the thing about algorithmic inequity is it cuts both ways. You know, it's not just inequity against Black people or Asian people. It's inequity against a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. You know, for instance, in and I've known this having worked in the car business and the finance business. You know, where you live, your zip code can influence your credit score.
Yeah.
Anybody that's ever worked in the car business or any sort of business where you had to finance something, I would imagine in well, we know it does in real estate, but you know, where you live, you know, the algorithm says what your house should be worth and how creditworthy you are. And it doesn't matter if you, because most banks now, a lot of banks now have their own internal, what they call internal scoring.
Yep.
Well, they may take a look at your Equifax number, but that's not what they all go by.
Yeah.
You know, they go by their internal scoring, and their algorithm says that if you are moving to a certain place from a certain place, you're probably not going to pay your house note. And then you can have an 850 credit score and pay every house note for 20 years, but you might be denied a loan because of the algorithm. And that's, you know, that's what we refer to when we say, you know, machine learning bias and algorithmic inequity. Yeah, I mean, talk about algorithms in terms of educational level and understanding coding, being, I call it the data in the coding class versus everybody else. You know, talk a little bit about that, Alex, how that might come into play.
Well, I think a lot of the time, who's able to control their own data within the system and operate within the system more equitably comes down to what they know about how it works, right? If you know how the system works, then you're maybe not as susceptible to its tricks. And even then, sometimes you are. I'll catch myself sometimes responding to an ad or responding to a certain point of view. And even though I understand it intimately, I'm still, and I can catch myself in the moment, I'm still, you know, caught in the wind of that. And so ultimately the problem is beyond just, you know, sort of being able to respond to it in a more educated way. You're also more susceptible to perhaps blaming the wrong people or blaming the wrong system if you're given a narrative of that, right? And this is common in rises to fascism. If everybody collectively, you know, across sides of the aisle feel like something's wrong with the system, but only some of them have had access and privilege to the education to know what that is. Then the other ones are susceptible to whatever boogeymen or narratives are sold to them. And that's where you run into issues like the, January 6th Capitol riots, because a bunch of people who genuinely thought that they were there to fight for some form of liberty or freedom and attack some form of, coup, when they were the ones on the brink of a coup, right? This is the problem, is that if you convince people who don't understand how things work using systems they don't understand of a narrative that isn't true, then it would have been much better if they had understood it, right? to be able to understand what was happening and look beyond it and think critically enough about it to find other sources, to know how, where to go and how to challenge it, how to take the step back and be able to recognize what was happening. And unfortunately, when you defund education for decades, especially not leaving room in most education systems for the proper technology education and exposure to education for some of the most vulnerable populations in the country, some of the poor, marginalized communities, everywhere from marginalized communities in inner cities, but also to, the white middle of nowhere communities across America, the rust belts and the farmlands and places where there weren't huge education budgets to begin with, right? You run into issues where people are way more susceptible to narratives that maintain the status quo and continue allowing those inequalities to prevail. And not only that, but it creates huge dissent, right? It creates huge dissent in the wrong direction, where people attack academics and attack experts and they attack the systems that we need to uphold and continue investing in, that's there for their own development and protection. So that's sort of the problem.
Yeah, and I think one of the bad things about capitalism is that it many times people will place money above all else. Nothing wrong with making money. I mean, we believe in making money, but I think when, like, for instance, something that comes to mind is Rand Paul tearing into Dr. Fauci. And the only reason he does it is because when he does it, he raises a lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, every time he tears into Dr. Fauci, he raises hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And so he's not concerned with, the fact that someone was traveling to kill Fauci from Wisconsin, was going to hunt him down and kill him, and his family gets death threats, and now he has to have Secret Service security. And he couldn't care less about that because he's more focused on the money.
Yeah.
So now he doesn't actually believe that Dr. Fauci is a boogeyman. But if he can portray him as a boogeyman, he raises a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because when people change their stance to go with the way the wind's blowing, with the right wing, that's why you have a lot of right wing governments in the world right now. Mm-hmm. It's because that's kind of the way the wind is blowing. And, I hate to think that this is a part of a design with social media companies. But when you think about the fact that they like to maintain control, it makes you wonder. Or it could be, like you say, it could be just the algorithm is doing this. The algorithm is creating every fascist government always has a boogeyman. Any government that's right wing, in the United States is black and brown people or liberals. I don't know, it's not even liberal.
We're gonna own the libs.
Libs, so every country, in France, it's the Arabs and the North Africans,
Yeah.
In England,
it's immigrants. It's
the immigrants in England.
Woke culture. It's critical race theory. Every week it's a new thing that's ruining. It's destroying America. Right? Is like these things that half the time aren't even real.
And the thing about it is so stupid. We hear these people talk about critical race theory. And they explain what it is, and nobody.
They don't know what it is. They don't even know what it is.
They don't even know what it is. But CRT.
Like, I don't know, but I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I don't like it. It's like who was it? one of the talk show hosts, a late night talk show host, Jimmy Kimmel, I think, was on the street. You know, he was asking people in Texas. He said, "What do you like, the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare? Which one's better?" You know, and people would say, "I don't like that Obamacare. That's a bunch of crap." He said, "I like the Affordable Care Act." He said, "Okay, great." Then he asked somebody else. He said, "What do you like better? You know, do you like Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act?" And just about everybody to a point says, I hate that Obamacare. That's just a bunch of crap. I don't want anybody telling me what I have to do. So I like the Affordable Care Act. Well, of course, they're the same thing.
Right.
People didn't know that, and they were just, you know, making it based on what people had told them.
Yeah.
And I was, you know, it shouldn't be a surprise, but I think, you know, when people, and I think it's really been exacerbated this last 2 years because people have been inside more and on social media more. So you would expect to see more algorithmic activity,
Mhm.
which I think you did. You know, when you have, you know, people protesting around the world for George Floyd, and some of them didn't even know why they were protesting. Some did because they saw the video, but a lot of them didn't. You know, we had Black Lives Matter, and you know, a lot of different countries where they really didn't have any Black people. But
Yeah.
I think, you know, the algorithms kind of threw people some way, and then other people they threw another way. You know,
Right. It was that contagion theory, right?
that contagion. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So,
that's sort of the problem with these social media companies is they don't, like you said, they're not intending for this to happen. The reality is that they have their set of goals, they have their benchmarks, they have their projections that they have to meet for shareholders and for company growth and all these things. And at that scale, you're talking about growth at the expense of millions of people, right? And that's a really big problem. When to get there, you have black box algorithms that the engineers don't even understand, right?
they don't even understand.
They don't control them. They don't understand them. They put them into motion, but they don't actually know what the neural networks are going to be and what the results are going to be on the public.
Mhm.
And then they retroactively try to respond. They try to respond. You know, they try to like quickly put band-aids on things, like, you know, fact checking on posts and things. And by that point, it's too late. So now you're adding fact checking based on a couple other like independent fact checkers and blah, blah, blah. And people, if people cared about fact checking to begin with, they would have been doing it. But they don't care about it. The people who need the fact checking don't trust the fact checking, because the fact checking to them is the propaganda. And they've absorbed a bunch of propaganda themselves to the point where the fact checking doesn't even matter. I mean, if they cared about looking things up and understanding what the truth was, they would have done that already. And so now these social media giants are just sort of floundering because they've created all these dramatic impacts on society and they don't know what to do about it.
Right, yeah.
But they're still making money, so they're still doing it. So it's
Yeah, and see, they look at it as I think they look at it as collateral damage.
right.
You know, that's just like, you know, a drug dealer. I don't think a crack dealer would ever say, "Well, I don't want to sell crack because it ruins people's lives and causes people to shoot policemen and try to carjack a cop and, you know, break in houses, and it causes a lot of death and destruction." As well as other drugs like meth, OxyContin. You know, drugstores didn't say, "I don't want to sell OxyContin." They made billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And they knew they kept making it stronger and stronger. And
Right.
OxyContin's a good example where, you know, the money sort of co-opted the common sense and the good for
Their
society.
salespeople were selling it to people that
Yeah.
shouldn't
they
have
said,
ever sold it. Yeah,
and
doctors
see, the
were
thing
getting
about,
incentivized.
right. The thing about OxyContin is actually stronger than morphine.
Mhm. Yeah.
They said it's a weaker form, it's a weak opiate. You don't get addicted. And what they did was pretty insidious. What they did was they said, well, instead of taking 2 pills, we're just going to double the dose to 40 and they only have to take 1 pill. Well, see, what they were doing is people were getting hooked twice as fast.
Right.
And then before the bottom fell out, they doubled the dose from 40 to 80. When people were getting hooked on 5 milligrams, now they got 80 milligrams.
Yep. Yeah, they got 80s.
So they can make more money. You know, they can make more money with selling the least amount of pills. So to the government, they could say, well, you know what, we're not even selling half of what we sold last year. We're reducing our sales, but they were selling 3 times the potency. So and that's another case where there was no algorithm involved, but I think, and then maybe there was.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an example. I mean, that created the opiate epidemic, right? But imagine that now, right? Like, imagine a drug company like that, or several companies at this point who use social media or viral content on TikTok or things to sell an idea, right? I mean, this is how Xanax became a cultural component. I mean, you had rappers with names like Lil Xan. I mean, like, I mean, you certain drugs end up with cultural significance of layers beyond just the drug itself and the context it's supposed to be used in, and it becomes so much more than that. And when you have echo chambers and algorithms that exacerbate that problem. Well, let's say now you have a bunch of kids who listen to Lil Xan, and now they're Googling Xan or Xanax, and now they're like being met with like this whole subculture of people whose identity revolves around taking Xanax in bars. I mean, so this is where the algorithm becomes dangerous, right? Because the fuel of making money as a social media company or as a set of social media companies paired with the fuel of advertisers of these brands who maybe make certain things, now benefiting from that process and perhaps leaning into it, all at the expense of human life and human quality of life. This is where we end up in a severe problem, because it's directing human behavior. And this is so much more than surveillance capitalism at this point. It's corporate surveillance, perhaps more insidious, but quieter than a Chinese state surveillance. It's actually leading to state surveillance because they're ultimately lobbying and writing legislation for the legislature. I mean, a lot of legislators take verbatim. I don't know if people know this, but the lobbyists will actually provide sample legislation to legislators, and they're not going to read 300 pages of that.
Or they write the legislation for them.
They write the legislation
for them. They don't have to. They can be lazy as hell and go on a golf course, and they write the legislation.
They just submit that. So the corporations are writing legislation because they paid for the legislators to get there in the first place. And so ultimately, if we have this problem of quieter, more insidious corporate surveillance, our problem is that it's becoming state surveillance, and all of us are willing participants. It's not like China where it's forced. You're not forced to use these social media platforms, in some ways, maybe peer pressured or whatever, societally pressured. But at the end of the day, you don't have to be on Facebook. You don't have to be on TikTok. You don't have to be on Instagram. But we're willingly doing this over years and years and years, at this point, decades, providing our data every single day to the point where they know us better than we know ourselves. It's obviously creating very damaging issues in society. And the question going into this fourth industrial revolution is, who owns that, right? Who owns our data? Who owns the software that runs our lives and that we use and provide a stream of consciousness to all the time?
Right.
That's a pretty dystopian trajectory if we don't do something about it.
And I think it's put the politicians in a pretty weird position, because you look at the Republicans, you say, well, how could all Republican senators vote the same way every single time? It's because the people with the money and the money guys that can take them out of office instruct them how to vote. And when you talk about algorithms, if Facebook can get 100,000 people, 300,000 people to the polls when they only need 100,000 to swing an election, I'm quite sure they can defeat Alex Jewell if he's running for Congress, if he gets too far out of bounds, And so I think, people don't like to think about it, but Mark Zuckerberg could, if he wanted to take a senator down, it'd be a pretty simple task to do it.
Well, yeah, if you could swing a national election by,
I mean, if he wanted to swing a senator one way, and I was talking to my brother. My brother said, well, maybe if they wanted to be 50-50, so they could kind of keep everybody in line. you know.
Well, yeah, you look at a company like United Healthcare, right? United Healthcare, you look up, I mean, all of this is public record of what corporations donate to. Right down the middle, 50% Republican, 50% Democrat. They own everybody. They, United, they make $350 billion a year.
Mhm.
They don't care. They'll pay off they'll bankroll anybody's election. Because it doesn't matter who wins. They're all on the same side of the corporate interest in our government and our governance, right? And I mean, this ultimately creates the conflict of interest between politicians who have, I mean, it's such a joke. You listen to congressional hearings where they feign interest in, oh, well, what does this mean for my constituents? What does this mean for the people that voted for me? Like,
Oh, so
what does this mean for
to
their quality of life and what they need and their freedoms? And
yeah, you know how it is. The billionaires get the millionaires to front for them and do the bidding. Well, they make more billions, and the millionaires get to make. I mean, you look at Fox News. I mean, it's not a news show. You know what I'm saying? It's
right.
Everybody.
Yeah, it's a podcast at this point.
It's a podcast, and
we might as well be up there just giving our opinions about
stuff. Yeah, I mean, they've even contradicted themselves, but they get these exorbitant salaries because Rupert Murdoch has done this all around the world. Yeah. Matter of fact, they made him sell his station or his newspaper in the UK because they said he told too many lies. I forget the name of it. Wasn't Sky News, was it? I can't remember what it was, but they made him sell it because he told too many lies. And you read the Wall Street Journal now. That used to be a paper prior to the time that he owned it. That you got some legitimate news stories. I mean, it was always kind of conservative, but it wasn't like really crazy. Now it's gone off the deep end now, along with Fox News and some other places.
New York Post, you got certain publications like Forbes, even, certain publications have conservative lean because at the end of the day, they're all capitalistic giants themselves, and conservative economics is what has enabled them to exist. So it'd be weird if they were like, screw this financial inequality. That's why they exist, because of that financial inequality.
Right. And it's so I think it wouldn't shock me to know that because I think we a lot of times algorithms are written and the machine learning sort of it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and sort of the machine learning follows the way to the goal. If they say my goal is to maximize profits, how do I do that? Says, well, you start talking about Alex and say he's an awful person, and you'll make X amount of money. And then if you add Robert to the mix and say he's even worse than Alex, you'll make even more money. So that's what they do. And so those are the articles that are pushed and are put up as fact that people tend to believe, because the one goal is to make money. It's not to have a better society or have equity in healthcare. That's not the goal. If you wrote an algorithm that said, how do we achieve equity in healthcare? I'm quite sure that a lot of people would make a lot less money, but there'd probably be better healthcare for most people.
Yeah.
But that's not what the objective is. The objective is to make all the money in the shortest amount of time before somebody passes legislation and brings everything to a halt.
It also, it skews trends, right? I mean, it highlights edge cases. It highlights sort of the shocking components of reality. And if you get enough of those, like let's say you get enough news stories that are just about shootings, right? Well, now, or carjackings. Well, now you think that the only thing happening out there are shootings and carjackings. You're like, well, I saw 4 stories this week about crime that's happened in my neighborhood. And now my neighborhood is this criminal ridden, it skews, because what sells from a news perspective ultimately isn't the most boring, mundane elements of reality that happen the rest of the time, right? The most of existence is sort of just going through the motions right now, and going to work and eating dinner, and and there's no news there, right? But if one of those people of out of a million did some crazy stuff, that's a news story. And now if you get a few of those over time, well, now everybody's out there doing crazy stuff all the time, right? And that skews it. And even when we talk about cryptocurrency, most journalists don't understand cryptocurrency, but they write these headlines. I saw one today: Bitcoin goes haywire as market crashes, then instantly uncrashes.
Well, you don't have to write a retraction because you get it both in the same story, you know. Yeah,
Because it's not the Onion, you know, like these are real. Somebody wrote that headline. And it's just, at the end of the day, what that creates though is sentiment of volatility, right? And so now people think everything's volatile, and it crashed and boom, like it exploded. You know, you use these dramatic words in headlines, and nobody's reading down to the 11th paragraph to read about, you know, something that's perhaps more objective or realistic about the boring progress or development that's happening over time. It's about this market sentiment that's been created and exacerbated, a self-fulfilling prophecy of the headlines that retail people are constantly consuming across a ticker, or constantly reading the headlines on their refreshing page, and they're making big decisions as a result of that in the moment. And then that's overcorrecting, and that's correcting it, and then you're constantly creating chaos simply because algorithms are responding to the chaos, right? And then as human beings, we're getting roped into that as simple participants who don't have control over that ecosystem for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think the reason you have so much bashing of cryptocurrency is because cryptocurrency is decentralized finance. There's, you know, Bitcoin, there's no central authority that controls Bitcoin and can say, well, you know what, we're going to increase the Bitcoin supply, and we, you know, B1, and we're going to increase B2. And then the next month says, well, we're going to decrease the Bitcoin supply. They can't do that. It's a free market. It's a truly free market financial system. And a lot of people are not too crazy about that because, you know, they don't have control over it. I mean, you know, you know, hedge fund managers, if you got a lot of money and you give it to a hedge fund manager, you know, you're basically guaranteed 20, 30, 40% a year.
Yeah.
Because they have all the algorithms and they make decisions based on making money, more money with your money. And
efficiency.
You know, yeah. Somebody told me, he said, well, you know, if you're making 100 grand a year and you can, you know, you can save 5 or 10 grand, 30% is not going to make you rich. No, it won't. But if you got 100 million and you're adding 30 million to that every year, it's easier to get from, somebody told me it's easier to get from 1 billion to 3 billion than it is to get from 0 to 1 billion.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
then you're able to diversify that too, right? You end up with kind of a wider spread. And if a couple of those things do really well on the 1 million you put into it, that starts, you know, you have the privilege in that case to kind of move things around and try things out. And even if you lose 20K here and 40K here and $1 million over here, well, you made 10 million over here. So overall, you ended up well in the green each time, right? So, you know, it's just it's a numbers game. And scale, you know, it's not linear, right? It's, you know, it's sort of a curve.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And the thing about, you know, as long as we're talking about wealth transfer, wealth and wealth acquisition, and, you know, if you've got $1 billion in the bank and the bank's only paying 3% interest, well, that's still a lot of money.
Yeah, right.
You know what I'm saying? That's still a lot of money. But, you know, to someone that doesn't have a lot of money, you know, 3% interest is not going to really entice them. And I think
you made 60 cents.
Yeah.
No, it's, you know, it's less than inflation, of course, but
right.
You know, at the end of the day, I think, like, what do we do about that, right? This stuff's so bad. It's poorly designed. It's designed by the people who benefit from it. The algorithms at this point, even if they're sold as being some objective response to make things better and more improved and more fair, they even sell it as a more fair, right? But it's essentially data determines that destiny, right? And if where the data is coming from is us and our existing, the way that we did things, and the data is just learned from the way that we did things, and it's constantly learning about how we continue to do things, and we're continuing to do things in a very broken way, then those systemic inequalities and systemic problems and poorly designed economy just get reflected in the data. It gets reflected in AI, it gets reflected in algorithms that run. And if those algorithms are being used in situations that should be more human, where people could have the opportunity to make more human decisions, especially in like, legal cases where there's probably a lot of nuance and a lot of like humanity that goes into making those decisions. And judges are just sort of nonchalantly accepting what an algorithm spits out. You're losing a very critical component of what builds society for human beings, which is the human experience, right? What makes us human is the fact that like some people are maybe down on their luck or made a mistake because of very specific reasons that could be more understood by a judge versus somebody else who maybe did something out of pure evil, right? And
well, I think a guy that steals $1,000 to feed two starving kids is different than a guy that steals $1,000 to buy some meth.
Right. Yeah.
I think there's a difference, and I think they should be adjudicated differently. Most people might not agree with that, or some people might not agree with that, but I think you have to. You can't. Algorithms are not the greatest thing. I think what they do is they give people an excuse. They say, well, it's completely objective, but it's not completely objective. We know that now,
Right.
And, algorithms affect a lot of, your daily life in ways that you probably don't even know.
Yeah.
If you try to buy a house, if you buy a car, if you're moving into an apartment building, if you get insurance,
Yeah, health insurance, United Healthcare again, when they switched to algorithmic, pharmacy software, when they switched to algorithmic coverage software, those things favorited healthy white people more than, marginalized groups who were sick. And that inequality is very problematic if they're both paying the same amount of money every month for coverage, right? That's a problem, because efficiency misses the human condition, right? Efficiency doesn't have empathy, and it doesn't have story, it doesn't have nuance. And those are ultimately the things that make more developed societies run. It isn't just efficiency. We're obviously getting more efficient, but it's the human component of being able to intelligently say, we're no longer the warring tribal peoples who had to do things out of fear and survival. We're now a society where we can say, what's the baseline quality of life we want to establish for people? Not what are people naturally entitled to by God, right? It's what is the baseline quality of life that we are continuing to evolve and learn we think everybody deserves as human beings, as participants in society. And if algorithms are essentially just repeating our mistakes and repeating our biases that designed our systems poorly to begin with, they're not actually improving our systems.
They're just magnifying the shortcomings. Is what
exactly.
They're doing. They're magnifying shortcomings, And I wonder sometime if it's possible to have an algorithm that might be skewed towards having a better society.
I think it comes on
improving the human condition. I think you could do that, but it's just that everything, in the capitalist economic system is based on making the most money.
Right. What are the goals of the system? Yeah.
Yeah. And this is why, the people that sold OxyContin really no different than a crack dealer. They're no different. They're just more sophisticated. And instead of making 30 million, they made 30 billion.
Right. Yeah.
But there's no difference, man. It was basically the money was the end all to be all,
Right.
And I wonder if you could, if there could be an algorithm for maybe a social media company that says, hey, we're not just gonna send people things that they like that we know will elicit a response, but we're gonna send people things that might make them more empathetic towards their fellow human beings, worldwide, not just in this country, because this, there's a thing like, oh, well, you're from here and you're from there, you're this, you're that, and it's like everybody is in all these different tribes, but I sometimes I wonder if an algorithm could address some of that, or will it have to be addressed by complete decentralization? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think one, algorithmic design and decentralization are not, I don't think those are mutually exclusive, right? I think
Mhm.
we can very easily have algorithms that run on chain and are immutable on chain and transparent, right? This is huge. Being able to see the contracts, being able to see what's happening, being able to run our own data, right? And I think what this comes down to is representation in algorithmic design, right? If we have more people at the table, and it isn't just the handful of 4 white billionaires at the top, right? If we have more representation in the data input,
Mhm.
and then we have some sort of regulatory bodies, even if decentralized, let's say they're DAOs, I don't know, but there's some sort of regulatory concerns around that evolves over time, just like we have other legal systems, but more fair and less prone to,
And
influence or corruption.
just for the people that may not be familiar with DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, explain that in 60 seconds if you could, Alex.
Yeah, so decentralized autonomous organizations are essentially a centerless organization, right? So it's, let's say, a co-op, right? It's a co-op that has some shared goal, and there isn't some centralized set of executives or people running it and owning it. It's owned by the people who use it, whether that's a company that they all benefit from, whether it's a co-op, whether it's a nonprofit organization, whether it's a utility, right? You could have some shared digital utility or other, physical real world utility that a bunch of people rely on for some reason, and they are participate in this decentralized organization as equal members who contribute and reap some benefit from that, right? It makes it a very fair,
Very
way.
similar to a worker co-op.
Right, exactly.
Where the people that do the labor own the company, and they make the decisions to benefit everyone and not just up somebody at the top.
Right.
That invested some money, and okay. Decentralization is probably not going to be great for the stock market. Would you agree?
So, I mean,
how would that play out over the short term?
all the stock market is it's this capitalistic determination of value based on, sentiment and liquidity, and trends and where things are, right? It's a conglomeration of a lot of capitalistic financial instruments at this point.
It's not always
Securities.
based on how much money you make and how much money they think you're going to make. It's speculation.
It's a lot of speculation, right?
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
You look at PE ratios for a lot of companies, and not so much directly correlated always to profit, right? Margins. A lot of times it's correlated with speculation.
Throw a name out there, Tesla.
You're right. Yeah. I mean, exactly. So there's a lot of manipulation involved. Banks pay fees every year for some of the manipulation they participate in. It's gambling, right? It's speculation at the end of the day. Some companies will inevitably probably do well over time just because of, some of them are too big to fail at certain points. Now that the Fed's sort of gotten their act together and has stopped the money printer and has sent the market to rehab, we've seen a little bit of a pullback as things start normalizing back, because now it's become a little less speculative because the government isn't propping it up with meaningless cash, right? But end of the day, the stock market right now is broken, right? However, in a future decentralized economy, even if it's not driven by fiat currencies, it's not driven by central banks, it's not, maybe a lot of companies are decentralized, there could still be some level of stock market measurement and participation by people. I think the idea of a stock market for securities and people participating in the broader economy, even if it's not a capitalistic economy where we think differently about what the commodities are and what the currencies are, and what the tokenization of all those things are, if we think differently about all of those things within the context of some shared market where people participate, it could actually be sort of a perfect way of participating in a more decentralized economy. So that stretches the imagination a little bit. So the short answer is the current design of the stock market is poor, and probably not best fitted for decentralized economies. But there are ways we could reimagine a stock market like utility in the future.
And it's past time for a change. I mean, they're overdue for a change. And what I think we talk about different economic systems, sort of have a limited lifespan of about 300 to 400 years. So I think capitalism is about 400 years now. So it's
limping around.
Limping around, it's probably
screaming at stuff.
Change. Yeah. Regulation, decentralized finance, cryptocurrency. We're going to have to see some sort of regulation, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, like I said,
hopefully it's not driven by people that want to make money, but it's driven by what's best for society.
Right.
What's best for the economy. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There's got to be regulation in the middle to some degree. Even if that regulatory body or those regulatory bodies or the regulation itself and the governance itself that protects perhaps the smart contracts or analyzes them, understands them, even if those things are decentralized and designed better without as much centralized human involvement or necessity, the idea of governance and protection for people and some analysis of reliability of a system, of health of the system, any red flags in the system, if some coders have developed something where it's given them a good exit at the top, or they can exit with all of the funds in the decentralized system, well, that's a bad decentralized system. We shouldn't allow that just because we're allowing everything. There should be some sort of regulation to protect consumers or average people who participate in the decentralized system. Decentralization itself doesn't solve the problem of human greed. In fact, it creates a lot of opportunities for us to think differently about how we govern human greed out.
It would solve the problem of rehypothecated treasuries, all right?
It would definitely solve the problem of imaginary treasuries being redundantly loaned out. Yeah, it's
and selling, holding 10 pounds of gold and selling it to 10 pounds to 10 different people with a contract. It would probably stop that too. So there's
overbooking the hotel rooms.
Yeah, airplanes. Yeah. They say, well, we canceled 100 flights. Well, you overbooked 350. So
yeah, I mean, you can't just strap more people on the top of the plane.
Yeah. Well, one thing we know for sure is data is here to stay. Algorithms are here to stay, and people might want to become educated, particularly young people and older people alike, about data analytics, about algorithms, about the surveillance capitalism. Data is sort of we're in like the data economy now.
Right.
People who own the data and control the data, understand the data, know how to manipulate the data, are the ones at the top.
Yeah.
And the other ones who don't understand it, pretty soon won't be able to get a job.
Right.
Because what's happening is that as there is a redistribution of wealth to the top, there's nobody in the middle. There's always going to be people at the low end, because any capitalistic economy has to have people at the bottom for people in the middle and the top to make money. But what's happening in the last few years, the people at the top, and not just in this country, have taken all the money from the people in the middle. There's going to be nobody in the middle to buy anything.
No.
And I think a lot of it has to do with how well people understand data and who owns that data and what type of societal steward they may be.
Right.
Facebook, Google could be totally different kinds of companies.
Right.
And one of the things I think that gets overlooked a lot is this just isn't a national thing. These are global organizations.
Right.
So it's going to take some cooperation globally to kind of rein this in. Would you agree?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of meaningless if just Europe or just one country in Europe, puts stricter regulations on a company,
Mhm.
because it's easy to use VPNs if they want to get around it. It's easy, it's a little bit difficult if there isn't unity on the scale of the company itself to protect the world from the company's greed, right, or its imperfections in its design.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've covered a lot, and we probably got through about 20% of what we had written down for our bullet points. So I think we will revisit this again next week and maybe do a little deeper dive and kind of look at where we're at and where we're going. Um, you know, China, for instance, likes their own digital currency. I think the United States has a group of banks that's trying to put together their digital currency.
Yep.
Currencies and banks have always been beholden to the countries that they exist in. But the thing that makes Bitcoin and cryptocurrency different is it's not beholden to any country. It's a ledger that's verifiable, that you can use Bitcoin in Nigeria the same way you can use it in Scandinavia.
Right.
And buy, sell, and it has the same value in China that it does in South America.
One Bitcoin always equals one Bitcoin.
Always equals one Bitcoin. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not dollars or the dollar to the yen and all that kind of stuff. One Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. So I think, as we move toward a decentralized economy and a decentralized world, there are a lot of implications that go far beyond economics, political, voting, for instance. If somebody puts voting on a blockchain, a lot of people won't like that. But ensure that there is total legitimacy and transparency in the voting system. So a lot of changes coming down the pipe, a lot to do with data, a lot to do with coding. If you haven't taken Python course, join me. I'm trying to learn a little more about it because that just seems the way the world is headed.
Yeah.
So we appreciate you joining us for tonight. And like I said, we're here once a week. The DeFi Collective at gmail.com is our email address. Please follow us, subscribe on YouTube, the DeFi Collective, or Let's Talk Radio. And let's hear from you. Let us know the subjects you'd like to talk about concerning decentralized finance, and we will certainly try our best to address them. So I guess that's it. Wear your mask. Alex, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. Back to the safety measures.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, this is when we thought we were out of this. Here we go again. So well, at least we have a little experience now. So we'll see what happens. So hopefully it gets better before it gets worse. But we'll see.
Be safe.
All right. Thank you for your time. Good night.